ready to hear about our Heavenly Father's plan for you?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Fresh Cuts. This is Mike. Joining me, as always, it's Mr. Venom. What's up, Venom?
Greetings and salutations, religious fanatics. Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Mike, how the hell you doing?
I'm doing well. Back here so quick after recording No More Ruin Hell 63, which was the longer episode that we've done in a while, but super fun.
I'm still recovering.
Cool. All right. Well, here to help us recover, it's Don and Nelly. What's up, Don?
Yeah, what's going on? Always happy to be here.
Okay, so today, or for this episode, we will be covering for the first time, the new release Heretic, starring Hugh Grant. He's probably the most known. Sophie Thatcher has...
Topher Grace is in here, man.
Topher Grace,
for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's true. Topher Grace, yeah, he's recognizable as well.
It's kind of funny because as soon as I saw him on screen, I thought it was him. It's like, is that him? I guess it could be because I haven't seen him in over 10 years, probably like most people. But then as soon as he speaks, it's like, oh, that's Topher Grace. Like that voice is unrecognizable. He's going to be a squeaky voice teen for the rest of his life. So.
Yeah, Sophie Thatcher, she might be recognizable for people that watch Yellow Jacket. She plays one of the 90s timeline teenagers, and I think she's been in like a Blumhouse horror movie like in the past year or so.
I thought I recognized her as like a girlfriend or something, but I mean, I wasn't bothered to go back and look her up.
Yeah, I know she's been in a movie we've covered. I just can't remember the exact one it is. But yeah, so Heretic, and let's take a rather short synopsis off IMDb. Two young religious women are drawn into a game of cat and mouse in the house of a strange man. Yeah, pretty much short and to the point. It's currently sitting at a 7.3 on IMDb, so at least like the early reactions have been pretty good by the masses, it looks like. So we will start with the general thoughts, and I'll kick it to Venom. What did you think of Heretic?
I mean, overall, I enjoyed this movie, but I gotta say, I am thoroughly, thoroughly disappointed with the ending. Like, I flat out hate the ending. Like, for the first hour to an hour and a half, I'm totally invested. I'm into Hugh Grant's character, Mr. Reed. I mean, he's very much like me, a person who's constantly questioning religion, organized religion. So, you know, I saw a lot of myself, especially my younger self, in a lot of what Mr. Reed was talking about with his, kind of contradictory speak about different religions and the iterations and everything else. So I was totally on board for that. And plus the whole mystery of the whole thing of, you know, where this movie's going, what's going to happen to these two girls, blah, blah, blah. But then once we kind of get the reveal of what's actually happening here, it loses all of its mystique, and specifically Mr. Reed. Like, he just loses all of his mystique, and he just, to me, ends up just being, I don't know, just your basic psycho. Like, it didn't bring a whole lot to it, the way the first hour to an hour and a half of the film did. Like I said, folks, I was on board. I thought the performance from our two main, girls were great performances. I was invested in both of their outcomes. You know, are they going to get out of this house? Are they going to be very changed if they get out of the house? Things like that. But man, once the blonde sister, the blonde Mormon sister goes into the basement, I lost all interest in the movie. I'm just like, oh, really? This is it? You're not special or different at all. You're just another idiot who just wants to kill people. Like, and even though he kind of comes off as wanting, because he's obviously trying to, I don't want to say convert, but he's trying to open up religious people's eyes about religion in general and its history of all religion, not any particular one. Even though the two main the girls in this movie are from the Church of Mormon, the Latter-day Saints. He kind of took down all religions. And like I said, I was invested, and then it just I like there's barely any kills in the movie. There's like maybe one or there's three total, and I don't know. One of them is just kind of dumb, like just a kind of okay, and then the other one is kind of. It's almost like a fake out, which, that if you've been listening for the last few weeks, you know how much I hate fake out kills. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where the movie wrote a check that it just couldn't cash, unfortunately. Like I said, I was invested the whole time. I like that it was kind of sort of a chamber piece. It's not a true chamber piece because it doesn't take place all in one room, though the majority of the film does take place all in Mr. Reed's house, just in different parts of the room, or different parts of the house, but two specific rooms of the house, the basement and then like the main reading room or whatever, the chapel, I think he called it. So yeah, I don't know. This was a weird one. Overall, it's a well-made film. Like its technical prowess can't really be questioned. It looks nice. The score is serviceable. The performances are fine. I'm not a Hugh Grant fan. Like I just am not the biggest fan of the man. He hasn't done any movies that I really give a rat's ass about. But I will say his performance here is pretty damn convincing. Like I liked it. I just wish he was written better as far as his like motivations, once we get that reveal at the end of the film about his motivations and what he's actually doing. I just wish it was more compelling, and I just wish it had more to do with what he was talking about for the first hour to an hour and a half of the film. So I don't know. He started out as this very intelligent, charismatic, person, but then he just kind of turns into just another basic psycho idiot. Unfortunately, Heresy, a well-made film filled with really good performances, but the story just falls flat for me in the third act, and I walked out of the theater completely unsatisfied. Like I just was really, really unhappy with it. And that's too bad. When a movie's good for 3/4 of its running time, but then the end just leaves you flat, that's the last thing the movie leaves you with. So you're going to be walking out of the theater with that in your head of, I wish there was more, or I wish that ending was better, or blah, blah, blah. You're barely thinking about the first hour where you were still invested and actually cared. So, yeah, overall, decent movie that just falls flat in the third act for me. That's about it for general thoughts.
All right. Don, how about your general thoughts on Heretic?
Yeah, I'm pretty similar for a lot of the same reasons. I actually really, was intrigued by this. I kind of found the premise kind of intriguing. I really wanted to, taking down religion, yay, that's always been a, positive of mine. But I really wanted to like the concept of this, and the idea of intelligent conversational, religious conversations. That was something that it was kind of intriguing. It kind of felt like this old school, like, Hitchcockian suspense thriller, like what's going on, what really would have happened here. And it was kind of something that, it doesn't really scratch the horror real strongly, but it was something that kind of made me, okay, this could be, at least interesting. It may not fall technically into the genre, but it'll still be a good time. And it starts off that way. I really like the way the first two acts kind of come together. The girls show up, the conversation starts, and there's always that hint underneath about what's really happening. Are they really pawns in his game? What's really, lurking beneath the surface of his, all the questions and what all the, different topics mean. But yeah, when it actually finds out that, he's doing this for a different reason, that kind of takes away a lot of the mystique in this. It kind of just turns this into a really underwhelming time, and it really kind of just takes a lot of the mystique and intrigue out of this one, and it just, it boils it down to, the garden variety maniac who's just using a, new pickup line. And as intriguing as that pickup line is, it's really not that, it's not as exciting as it thinks it is. And yeah, I mean, the final act of this, it's fine. I mean, the different encounters throughout the house are not bad, but yeah, this just didn't really wow me as much as I thought it would be. And I mean, yeah, it kind of, falls flat at the horror realm. And, for me, this is still much more suspense thriller than anything. I mean, it's not a bad one. The first maybe hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes of this are still really enjoyable. And, until you realize what's really happening, it's, kind of chilling, and it leaves like a really solid impression. But yeah, when you find out what's happening and you realize that this is just another garden variety maniac, it's just not that special. And I really wish that they would have gone a different route with this. I kind of was thinking that it would just be another kind of, maniac on the loose kind of a film, maybe about a quarter of the way through, but I didn't want to think that it would go that route. And then it started it started being more and more obvious, and it kind of just left it even more underwhelming. So, yeah, not a bad first time. Definitely has its moments here and there, but wish this one would have gone a different route, and probably would have been a genuine horror film for once. But can I say it's worthwhile? I mean, if you care more for presentation than you do content, maybe. But yeah, there's not as much here as I thought it would be, and it's definitely a bit more underwhelming as much as I wanted it to. You know, it may not be a high priority, but when it gets to streaming, it's probably going to be a pretty decent time, especially if you don't take the finale into account. But I mean, it's one of those where the final act of this really kind of does it a disservice. So I mean, maybe check some of the other stuff out first before you go to this one, especially if you're doing end of year lists, which is kind of right around the corner that we're going to be spending a lot more time with. So I mean, at the risk of saying anything else like truly concrete or spoiler heavy, I mean, it's a solid time if you're interested in the technical aspects. I mean, it looks great. The house is mysterious. There's always those quick glimpses into those quick shot glances at him where he's throwing sinister grins and smirks, and it looks like he's being outwitted, but that there's something deeper going on. Those are always kind of a fun time. So yeah, if you're mindful of that, if you mind more suspense thriller than outright horror, it's probably gonna be a much more enjoyable time. But yeah, go in knowing that there's problems, and it's not as coherent all the way through. So I guess I'll leave it at that and kick it back to you.
Let me jump back in here real quick, Mike, before you jump in, because there's something I actually forgot to talk about. This movie is very, very dialogue driven. Like this has like some of the most dialogue I've seen in a horror movie in a very, very long time. I mean, there's the first major scene in the house is like a 20 to 25 minute scene of just them talking. But it's so compelling what they're talking about, the way that he's comparing religion to fast food and Monopoly and different things like that. Like that, all that was compelling, and I was invested. But then there's no payoff. And to give an example, last year, Nefarious was a horror film that was very dialogue driven, and it was actually my number 3 film of 2023. I absolutely adore that film because it was awesome throughout and then still gave me a satisfying ending. Unfortunately, this one is pretty great throughout, but the ending is so dissatisfying that it just leaves you flat, like I said. So yeah, despite the fact that I am a big fan of dialogue driven character study type horror films, this one just didn't do it for me. So I just wanted to jump in with that too. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No worries, because I'm gonna say similar things to what you guys said. Actually, like I was kind of into the concept of the movie when it started. Although I will say, like, even though am I on kind of like the perspective of like what Hugh Grant's character is saying for like the first couple of acts? Sure. But it's also like, okay, it's a middle-aged dude lecturing like 2 teenage girls on something. So it's like, okay, that can get kind of old. Like, who cares? Like, obviously more life experience, and it's not like they were being like showed up like condescending or rude, or it's like, dude, stop this. But then you kind of understand what his motivations are and why he's doing this. I think my issue is this almost feels like it was more supposed to be like a tense drama instead of a horror, and then they just kind of made the third act. They tried to make it like more horror, and it just comes off kind of goofy to me more than like scary. Once you kind of get like reveal, like there's a couple reveals, like okay, here are his motivations, and then there's further reveals about like what's going on. And I feel like the further, and this is like, later in the movie, like third act stuff, I just feel like where you're supposed to kind of get like the real punch, it just kind of came off cheesy to me. Like when you're like, what? Like you're willing to go this far with, like, okay, I don't know. It seemed like it almost became like a different movie than like what it was at the beginning. Wasn't expecting it to be, or at least to attempt to go that far with it, but the way it executed it, just, I don't know, it felt kind of cheesy to me. But like, the first act I really liked. I liked kind of like the introduction of our characters. I liked their initial reactions. I liked the setup, like when they first discovering that something's not right. I thought that was all really well done. The setup of everything was great. The movie looks good. But yeah, I just felt like once the movie got to where it was trying to get, it just kind of fell apart for me. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add because I kind of agree. I was curious what you guys were going to think, because I was like, man, if they loved it and I'm going to say it falls apart in the third act, they're going to be like, what are you talking about? But it seems like we're kind of all on the same page about
You
the
thought
movie.
I would love this? What?
No, not
Yeah, I mean, you bring up
I didn't think
Nefarious.
you were
I mean,
gonna love it. I was just saying it, like, on the chance.
I was going to say Nefarious. I was going to say, when you brought up Nefarious, I kind of was along those same lines, because I did see it shortly after you talked about it, and it wasn't for me, but I can see you with the way you were talking about it on the show. I could see the way you were talking it up, and this one reminded me a lot of that movie when you brought it up in the second cut in. It did remind me a lot of Nefarious. Since you brought it up.
I just wish it, kind of stuck the landing the way Nefarious did, or at least in my opinion, the way Nefarious did. So yeah, oh well.
Yeah, and by the end of it, I think his motivations get a little convoluted for the other stuff we find out he's doing. Because in the first couple acts, it's like, okay, we see he's kind of trying to challenge them on like their beliefs, the belief system, and like you figure like, okay, there's going to be some payoff or some point to why he's doing this. And I think once we get to like what the point was, just like, what, like, okay, this is I think, like you said, Venom, the payoff just doesn't feel worth it.
It's unearned. I don't know, it feels lazy. It just, like I said, I mean, this is an almost 2-hour long movie. So for me to be so on board, and when I say I was totally invested, I that's not hyperbole. Like, I'm literally like, oh wow, this is actually really cool. Like, I was ready to give this like a 9 out of 10 halfway through the movie. Like, I was absolutely loving the conversation, loving the back and forth. I even thought that the girls handled themselves well, because obviously they're dealing with a much older, much more intelligent person, but they still, challenged him periodically, didn't just, take everything he said as, no pun intended, as gospel. But yeah, it just, I don't know. It's like you set up this villain to seem like he has this grand design, this grand end game, and then when you actually see it, it's like, really? Like, okay. Like, it left me so flat. I feel like The Blackening again, where I hated that ending of The Blackening. It just ruined the entire movie for me. Not to say that I was as on board with The Blackening throughout as I was with this one, but it just just to, compare it, it's the same thing. Like, once I saw that ending, it's just like, oh, like, yeah, that's not good at all. Sorry. Oh man, and this is an A24 film, god damn it. I hate disparaging A24. I mean, they're the company that's kind of re-elevated horror to a place where, I mean, they're doing like Oscar nominated stuff, and man, and that what's funny, was the blackening A24, or am I thinking of Bodies, Bodies, Bodies? I'm probably thinking
Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
Bodies was
Okay.
A24.
Okay, that's what
I don't remember blackening. That may have been Blumhouse.
Oh, well, that's even worse.
It
But
may have
anyway,
been.
yeah.
Don't quote me on that. It may have been, but I know
Sure.
Bodies was A24 because that was
Yeah, exactly.
part of that was the promotion packet. It was A24 slasher.
Right. So yeah, it just seems really odd that over the last or over the first 10 years of A24, they could do no wrong, and now over the last couple of years, they've kind of become another one of those movie studios that, at least their frequency of doing quality movies is still higher than most studios, but now they're starting to devolve into doing just stuff that's not nearly as, compelling, as challenging, as just, mind-blowing. I mean, yeah, this movie is not Hereditary by any stretch of the imagination, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, they could be looking for to make some movies for revenue streams to fund their actual good quality stuff is what I'm guessing.
I mean, I guess, but I mean, this movie still, the way it was advertised too, it almost seemed like it was going to be another one of A24's, more elevated horror films. But I don't know. Like I said, for the first hour to an hour and a half, it is. And then the last 15, 20 minutes, it just fizzles out, at least in my opinion, because I have been seeing people praising the movie. I've actually, this is an interesting one because I've actually seen the entire spectrum. I've seen people who absolutely love it. I've seen people who are kind of indifferent to it. And then I've seen people who literally think it's absolute trash, which is interesting because, I mean, I don't think this movie's trash necessarily. It definitely doesn't stick the landing, but I wouldn't call it trash by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, to actually see, after only 3 days of release, to actually see all these different kinds of opinions on it. Yeah, this is gonna end up being a very divisive movie. People are either gonna love it, they're gonna hate it. Some are gonna be like us, where we're just kind of it was okay for a while, and then it just died at the end. So yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Mike, I keep interrupting your general thoughts. Go ahead.
I mean, for me, I think it's all in the third act that's gonna divide people, because I think even for all of us that are in agreement about it, we're still saying the setup is good, it's still entertaining. It kept me engaged to figure out where the movie was going. It's just once we got there is when the problems happened.
Yeah, and some predictable stuff too, well, that might be a little bit of a spoiler, but I mean, who didn't think Sister Paxton was going to get up? I mean, honestly, I'm just waiting for it the whole time. She's going to get up. She's going to get up. She's going to get up. Oh,
yeah. I mean, that was
it's
fairly obvious. And I don't even know what they were trying to say by that, because it doesn't prove anything either way.
Yeah, the whole thing with the IUD, I'm still questioning, did Hugh Grant really not know what that thing was? Did he really think it was a microchip, or was he just screwing with Sister Barnes at that point? I don't know. I just, yeah. Like I said, some of the movie is just, it leaves a scratch in your head. Other parts of it are brilliant. It's too bad that the worst part of it is at the end. If the worst was at the beginning and then we get all the awesome at the end, it leaves us feeling a lot better about the movie. But if the ending sucks, then yeah, years down the line, I'm just gonna remember, oh, Heretic sucks, because I remember walking out of the theater hating it. Even though I technically didn't hate it, I just hated the ending. But you know how memory goes. Plus, I'm an old man, so I'll probably forget this movie in a few years anyway.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess we could kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the movie. This will be your final spoiler warning, folks. If you haven't seen Heretic and do plan on seeing it, go ahead and, after our glowing review, if you still plan on seeing it, go ahead and pause the show now and rejoin us when you've watched it. Or if you've already seen it or you don't care to, check out our spoiler-filled thoughts on the movie. So, I'm not going to really do a walkthrough so much as just a quick breakdown of the story. Now, if you've seen the trailer, then you already know what the setup is. Two, young sisters from the Mormon church go to visit this gentleman, to talk about the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. He invites them in. They start talking, about theology. As it turns out, he's actually a student of theology to the point where he's actually studied almost all religions, at least all the major ones. And he starts, obviously, the whole intention of the sisters being here is to baptize him into the Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. But obviously, he has a different plan for inviting them into the house. Eventually, he starts talking about religion and starts talking about iteration. And he comparing. First, he compares religion to Monopoly. And basically, he talks about how there was an original version of Monopoly, which is the most popular version of Monopoly. And he likened that to Catholicism, as Catholicism is the most popular religion, at least one of the most popular religions of the world. And then he brought up the landlord game. Now, the landlord game was a game created by a woman back in 1902, 32 years before the release of Monopoly. And when you look at the game board and the rules and everything, it's almost the exact same game. But because it was created by a woman, nobody really, nobody bought it. Like the Parker Brothers or, any other toy companies bought it. But when a man then presented, the concept for Monopoly as his own concept, they bought it and they turned it into the most popular board game in the world. So he was comparing Judaism to the landlord game, because Judaism technically, I guess in his eyes, came first. It was like the first major religion. And then it got diluted and turned into Catholicism. Then it got diluted again and turned into Islam. And with Islam, he compared that to one of like the special editions of Monopoly. Like it's not the traditional Monopoly, but it's like a Star Wars Monopoly or, Jurassic Park Monopoly or something like that. Because it's like an offshoot of the original, which is what he was saying Islam was. Islam is an offshoot of Catholicism, blah, 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 blah. So he's basically trying to make the point of, if all of these religions are basically just iterations of themselves, then what is the one true religion? And I thought that was his end game. I thought that Mr. Reed's end game was to find out what is the one true religion, if there even is one. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the motivation that we're going with. That whole board game conversation was awesome. I absolutely loved it. Then later in the conversation, they talk about they compare religion to fast food and how everybody has different fast foods that they like. Like some people like Burger King more than McDonald's. Some people like Wendy's more than Carl's Jr., blah, blah, blah. And he's likening it to that. Like, oh, well, some people like Catholicism more than Judaism because it fits their personal beliefs more. So that's what they go with. So like I said, this 20 to 30 minute scene of just straight dialogue is very compelling. Like I said, especially if you're like Don and myself, where we're all about challenging organized religion, then this conversation is awesome. It's so cool. It really, really is. But then, obviously, the girls start to get a little freaked out. They try to leave through the front door, the door that they came into the house. They realize that the door is locked, but there is no locking mechanism. There's no keyhole. There's no lock or a latch or anything, just a doorknob. So they go to Mr. Reed and say that they have to leave the house. They make up a lie and say that they, received the phone call, blah, blah, blah. He obviously knows that they're lying because his house is lined with metal, which means no cell signals can come in or out. So he knows anybody in his house can't make or receive a phone call. So he basically tries to comfort the girls and say, look, there's no need to lie to me. If you want to leave, just leave. Unfortunately, though, you can't leave through the front door because it's on a time lock. Who the hell has the front door of their house on a time lock so that it's locked all night and can't be opened again until the sun comes up is fucking beyond me. But obviously, when you have a specific purpose for it, you do. So he basically tells the girls, you can leave, but you have to leave through the back of the house because the front door is locked. And he shows them these two doors, and then he starts he starts breaking down religion, and he actually starts to put a little bit of doubt in their faith into the girls. Because what he ends up doing is there's two doors that lead down to the basement, which he claims will get you out of the house. On one door, he writes belief. On another door, he writes disbelief. And he basically tells the girls, based on the conversation that we just had, I want you to think very carefully about what you believe in right now, this second, and choose the correct door. Now, obviously, this is a horror movie, and any savvy horror movie fan knows both doors go to the same fucking place. It's not like they're going to go anywhere different. And that's exactly what happens. The girls go down. They end up going down the belief door because despite everything that's been talked about, they still have their faith in God in the church of, the Mormon church, blah, blah, blah. Now, during all this, Topher Grace, who turns out to be the elder of this particular sect of the church, ends up realizing that the girls are missing. So he starts going through their itinerary, going house to house to all the places that they were supposed to visit. He eventually gets to Mr. Reed's house, and Hugh Grant does answer the door. But of course, he lies and says, oh, they never really showed up here, blah, blah, blah. And man, is Topher Grace just useless? Because he actually just accepts it and leaves. Then he ends up coming back, and it's like, oh, good. Maybe he finally realized, maybe he saw like the tire tracks, the girls' bike's tire tracks out front or something. Or maybe he just had a sneaking suspicion. But nah, he just came back to give the guy that booklet, that Church of Latter-day Saints booklet that they always hand out. And then he disappears, and then that's it. We never see Topher Grace again. So why the fuck was he even in this movie? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. It seems like a waste to have a big-name actor play a character that's in a movie for, what, less than 5 minutes? A 2-hour movie that he's in for less than 5 minutes? Like, what's the point? But anyway. Eventually, the girls go down to the basement, and they are introduced to the prophet. And it basically is a very disheveled woman. You know, she looks like she might be supernatural, but she also looks like she might just be a dirty homeless person. You know, it's kind of up in the air. And she brings in a blueberry pie. And this is after blueberry pie was part of the conversation earlier on. I'm not going to get into it. Just remember the blueberry pie was mildly important to the opening conversation. So Hugh Grant comes on the intercom and basically says, this is the prophet. This is an actual prophet of God. And what we're going to do is we're going to watch a miracle. And he basically lets the girls know that he poisoned the pie. The blueberry pie is poisoned with hemlock and wormwood, and that the woman is eating it and that she's going to come back to life. What ends up happening is the woman eats the pie. She ends up passing out. The girls check her pulse and her breathing, and she is dead. She's absolutely dead. But then I forget exactly what it is that Hugh Grant does to draw their attention away. I think he physically walks into the room, opens the door. The girls see him walk in, and then he just quickly walks back out and locks the door behind him. Which distracts the girls long enough that something happens. So they end up going back into the basement room. Sister Barnes, the blonde, Sophie Thatcher, thinks that the body is in a different position than it was before. Like something is wrong here. Sister Paxton, Chloe East, doesn't think so. She's like, no, it's in the same position it was in when we left. Stop being paranoid, blah, blah, blah. Of course, what ends up happening, eventually the prophet does wake up. It creates a little bit of a jump scare because Sister Paxton looks up at the table, sees that the body is gone, and then she turns around and the prophet's standing right behind her. And then the prophet starts talking about what she saw, because that was the whole point. The whole point of killing the prophet and then bringing her back was so that the prophet could tell the girls what she saw. Martyrs, anyone? Very similar to Martyrs, I thought,
Yeah,
as I'm watching the scene.
I was thinking Martyrs too, and now that I think about it, I was like, yeah, the movie would have been better if it actually went that route.
Oh God, this movie isn't an iota as good as Martyrs, but yeah. What are you gonna do? So, like I said, the prophet wakes up, resurrects, and then tells the girls, I saw a white light, I saw clouds, but it wasn't heaven. And it's all of it is not real. Like, that's all she says. It's very cryptic. Hugh Grant then rejoins the girls back downstairs. He takes the prophet out of the room and puts her back in the room that she was in. And then again, they start talking. They try to interpret what the prophet said. And, the heretic talks about, see, there is no heaven, there is no hell, there is just white. There, you just die, and, that's it. And the girls, they're like, they're not 100% convinced, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, the girls do get a plan where Sister Barnes eventually gets a letter opener. She's able to get her hands on a letter opener. And Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton have a plan to attack him when a certain key word is used, magical underwear. I'm not going to explain the magical underwear because that goes back to the very beginning of the movie, practically the cold open. So just remember magical underwear. But what ends up happening is when Sister Paxton says the code word magical underwear, instead of Sister Barnes stabbing Mr. Reed slashes Sister Paxton's throat, literally slits her throat, and she falls down, presumably dead. And then he cuts her arm open because while they were talking earlier in the movie, he noticed that she had a scar on her inner arm. So then after he kills her, after he slits her throat, he cuts her arm open right at that scar, and he pulls out this long little metal thing, this little metal tube. And he basically looks at it and he goes, see, Sister Paxton wasn't real. She was an android. This is a microchip. He's trying to convince Sister Barnes that it's a microchip. The funny thing is, he knows it's not a microchip. He's counting on the fact that Sister Barnes is so pious and such a virgin that she wouldn't recognize an IUD. Yes, my friends, it's a fucking birth control device. It's a surgically implanted birth control device that, women use so they don't have to take the pill, or, because the pill sometimes has adverse hormonal effects to women. So with an IUD, there's less hormonal effects, blah, blah, blah. And, no taking, you don't need to remember to take a pill every night, blah, blah, blah. So, but the Sister Barnes instantly is like, I don't think that's a microchip. I think that's a contraceptive device. And you see Mr. Reed's face kind of sink, like, oh, you know what that is? Well, shit, there goes my plan. I guess you're not going to believe that, because he was trying to convince Sister Barnes that the world wasn't real, that we were living in a simulation. Matrix, anyone? He's literally trying to convince these two sisters that the world isn't real, that the waking world isn't real, and that what happens after death is the only thing that is truly real. Blah, 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 blah. So eventually Sister Barnes starts to kind of put the pieces together. She starts to realize that, the body was in a different position, so I don't think we witnessed a miracle. And, Mr. Reed is like, well, what do you think you just witnessed? And she goes, a parlor trick. It was just a basic magic trick. You just switched the bodies. And then, Sister Barnes goes, when you distracted us, the bodies were probably switched. Like another prophet probably came in, moved the dead prophet, and then got in that person's position. And literally, like an idiot, Mr. Reed goes, well, if that's true, then there would have to be some kind of opening under, on the floor for us to stash the body, because there's nowhere else to go in this room. Literally giving away his own plan, because then suddenly Sister Barnes realizes that the floor is muddy. And she sees that there's a table over a specific part of the muddy floor. So she moves the table, realizes that there's a drain underneath the table where the water that's leaking into that room is draining out into the basement, into the sub-basement. So she ends up digging through the mud, finding a handle, and then she opens up the handle, or pulls on the handle, and it's a door. So she goes into the door, and what does she find, my friend? She finds a room filled with prophets. There's probably about a half dozen or so prophets, and they're all in dog cages. They're all in little dog cages where they barely have any room to move. You know, they're all like in the prone position because it's about all the room they have in these things. And then that's when Sister Barnes realizes, that's the point that you were trying to make the whole time. The only true religion is control. Yes, that's the whole point that Mr. Reed is trying to make in this movie, that the only true religion in this world is control, because organized religion controls its parishioners. You know, be it Judaism, Catholicism, Islam, Mormonism, whatever the religion is, religions always have rules. They always have, you know, you got to go to church every Sunday, or you got to go to temple every Saturday, or you got to, you know, pray to Mecca, you know, once a day, or, you know, blah, blah, blah. And that's it. That's the whole point he was trying to make. I thought he had some grand design in play, and no. He's just trying to show these two sisters. I don't want to call them nuns, because I don't think they're called nuns in the Mormon religion. I think they're just, because they're not dressed like nuns, but their name tags do say Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton. So, you know, after we get that reveal, it's like, wait a minute. So you're just a regular old psycho who just likes to kill people, or turn them into a disciple. So all the women, that the quote unquote prophets, these are all people that he talked into becoming disciples for him. According to him, I don't know how true this is, but according to him, they're there on their own volition. They're, you know, they decided to stay there with him and work with him to, you know, continue to, you know, get religious people to realize that organized religion is bullshit, and that it's all about control, and that's it, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, Mr. Reed walks up to Sister Barnes and starts talking to her, and then he accidentally says the magic word, or the password. He actually says magic underwear, and instinctively, without even thinking, Sister Barnes just takes the letter opener and bam, just jams it into his fucking throat. Good on her, by the way. I thought that, you know, because Sister Barnes, of the two sisters, Sister Barnes is the more demure one. She's the more pious one, whereas with Sister Paxton, you could tell she's had a past. Obviously, she's got an IUD in her body, so she's obviously not a virgin. And she obviously has some kind of, you know, checkered past that brought her to the Church of Jesus Christ. So, and I think Mr. Reed recognized that right away, that Sister Barnes was the more, you know, virginal, pious of the two. So like I said, when she hears the magic word and without even, I mean, literally with no thought whatsoever, just stabs him in the throat, I thought that was awesome. She ends up trying to get out of the house. Unfortunately, the house is still locked because, you know, the time lock hasn't been released yet. And while she's going through the house, she ends up getting stabbed by Mr. Reed. Yeah, you know, 60-something-year-old Hugh Grant with a letter opener hole in his neck that's bleeding out somehow was able to get up and attack this girl in a whole different part of the house. So he had to get up the basement stairs to then catch her. He ends up stabbing her in the stomach just once. She falls over. And then he falls over as well, because he's obviously lost a lot of blood from the wound in his neck. Eventually, he starts to crawl towards Sister Barnes, and then Sister Barnes starts to pray. She folds her hands, she closes her eyes, and she starts to pray. And you could kind of see, you know, Mr. Reed's face kind of, you know, react to that. Like, oh, even after all this, you're still praying to God. Interesting. So he walks up to her. He pulls the knife out, the one that he stabbed her in the stomach with. He's holding it up to her throat. He's literally about to stab her throat. And then suddenly, wham, somebody attacks him from the side with a 2x4 with 3 rusty nails sticking out of it. And of course, it's Sister Paxton. Yes. And like I said in the opening, did anybody think she wasn't going to get up? I mean, it was so fucking obvious that eventually she was going to get up and save the day. And that's exactly what happened. She gets up. She ends up killing Mr. Reed. Unfortunately, after killing Mr. Reed, she then falls over dead. Sister Barnes is then able to get out of the house. She starts to make a phone call to the Mormon church. And then our movie ends right there. So yeah, that's it, folks. That's Heretic 2024. Like I said, for the first, I mean, this movie is over an hour and 50 minutes long. It's almost 2 hours. So for an hour and a half, I'm thoroughly invested. I'm loving the story. When he first brought out the prophet, I was like, ooh, I was intrigued. I was loving it. But then, yeah, once Sister Barnes figures out that it's just a parlor trick and that this guy's just full of shit and he's just using religion as a way to satisfy his need to kill, because it seems like he just wants to kill these people. He either wants to turn them to his side or kill them if they don't turn. And I would imagine most people probably wouldn't join him, considering all the fucking trouble that he's going through to try to convince people that religion is bullshit. So yeah, after all that,
that's my issue with the third act is like, what's his end game in this? Like,
exactly. I like I said, I figure he's either trying to get the two sisters to either join him to become prophets, disciples, because in the credits they're called disciples. He calls them prophets in the movie. But yeah, it seems like he was just trying to either get them to join him so that, they could continue doing their work of converting religious people into their belief system. Or if they don't, join him, then he just kills them. He has no trouble. I mean, he killed Sister Paxton so cavalierly. It's almost like he had done it thousands of times. Like, and right after he slit her throat, he looks back at Sister Barnes and smiles. So, I mean, this guy is obviously a proficient killer. But yeah, like I said, once you get the reveal that he's just a fucking another psycho using religion as a crutch for what he's, doing, thinking that he's doing the right thing. Yeah, the movie lost all its mystique, all, any desire I had to want to see, anywhere else that the movie went. Like literally with 15 minutes left in the movie, I'm checked out. I'm mentally and physically checked out. Like, I'm ready to leave the theater. I don't care anymore. I'm only staying because I know Mr. Reed's going to get his comeuppance. So I might as well watch and see if that at least is pretty cool. But, you don't even see it. Like I said, it kind of happens to the side of the screen. And then, she drops the weapon. Like I said, she then falls over dead from the slit throat, blah, blah, blah. What are the other deaths? What did I skip? So Sister Paxton, Mr. Reed. Was there anybody else? Anybody die in this movie? I think that's it, right? 2 deaths. Yeah, that's what I mean. So, Don's right. To call this a horror movie is a little bit of a misnomer. It's definitely more thriller. It's got horror elements, obviously, because Mr. Reed kind of just turns into your basic slasher by the end of the movie. But yeah, I definitely would lump this up into thriller more than horror. It's a thriller with horror elements. But yeah. That's all I got.
Yeah. It makes me wonder. It's like, well, if they would have just agreed with him in like the first 20 minutes of the movie and said, yeah, you're right, we have our doubts, would he be like, okay, cool, my work here is done, leave, you can leave now?
Well, I think I think because remember, Sister Barnes wanted to go down the disbelief door. She was convinced that everything that he was talking about was trying to lead them into disbelief, and she was actually going to play along. I don't know if she actually, had any kind of, crisis of faith at any point in this movie, but she was going to go down the disbelief door. It was Sister Paxton, the one with an actual past, who wanted to go down the belief door. So, yeah, but to answer Mike's question, what the fuck was his end game? No idea. He's just another psycho with a really nice house.
Yeah. It's like, I understand his point of like, religion is just about control, and it's like, okay, but like, is your point to have a philosophical discussion with people to convert them out of like religion? Like, I didn't understand what was the point of keeping people trapped in your cellar or basement or whatever, like to show, like to put on this big over the top display for like the next people that come to show that, like, exactly. I don't really understand.
Maybe it's not necessarily about the religion. To me, religion was just the play that he was using to get these women involved.
Yeah.
If we if we follow him for several others, I mean, he may have used other cons on some of his other disciples. I mean,
that's interesting. I mean, it's a possibility, sure.
I mean, yeah, he it may very well have been that religion was just a ploy to work on them.
Yeah, because they're sisters. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so he may have just used the religious debate for them because that was the end game with them being, they show up at his house dressed like nuns. He may very well have had other game plans for various other women to turn them into disciples.
Possibly. Yeah, I could see that. That actually makes me hate him more if that were the case. He's just using whatever he can use to get these women to do what he wants them to do. And of course, another male serial killer victimizing only women. Because he doesn't bother Topher Grace at all. He fucking lets him leave. So I probably wouldn't waste my time killing Topher Grace either.
All right. Is that it for Heretic? I mean,
like I said, there's not really much more to add. I think we've already kind of talked about all the positives, all the negatives. It's not a bad movie. It's not objectively a bad movie. It's not even a waste of time either. Like I said, like the ending might work better for maybe younger horror fans. Maybe 20, 30-year-old horror fans might dig that. Like maybe those are the positive reviews that I'm seeing online. Like people that are, I actually saw one person tweet that this is their favorite horror movie of the year. And I literally replied, well, what about Longlegs or Late Night with the Devil or Infested? And they're like, nah, this is better. And I'm like, oh, I ended the conversation right there. That's it. So like I said, you're getting the full gamut of people loving it, hating it, being indifferent to it, which, creates good conversation at least, but doesn't necessarily give us the most compelling movie, at least from beginning to end anyway. So, yeah, I'm done.
All right, that's going to do it for our discussion on Heretic and this episode of Fresh Cuts. But what do we have for people to listen to? Venom? Anything?
Oh, man, we got a lot. Yeah, we finally have a bunch. Let's see. First and foremost, No More Room in Hell presents Creature Comforts, episode 32. That episode dropped on Godzilla Day because on that episode, we review the original Gojira from 1954. Or Godzilla King of the Monsters, as it was known in America. Not that we reviewed the American film, but it did come up in conversation, obviously. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. So, and the other great thing about that episode is we had a little reunion. We had an underwater kaiju from outer space reunion as our friend Jerry Herring came out of podcast retirement to return to podcasting to talk about one of his favorite movies ever. I mean, he even did it on 2 days' notice, which I absolutely love. He's a trooper. So thank you, Jerry, for that. And yeah, that episode is available as we speak. So check that out. What else? We've got a new episode of the main show. I think we have 2 episodes of the main show because I think episode 62 just dropped. For one, because of, Mike's computer issues and, our network head going on vacation and just different things happening. It was a perfect storm of delays. But yeah, episode 62 should be out, which I believe those are my picks. Those were the Amicus anthologies where we looked at Asylum and From Beyond the Grave. And then just last night, we recorded episode 63 of the main show where we looked at 2 absolutely insane Japanese movies that were picked by our co-host, Mr. Derek B. One of them is way more insane than the other. Like if you were to watch the second movie by itself, you would say, wow, that was kind of crazy. But if you watch it after our first movie, it's almost normal compared to the first movie. But yeah, like I said, episode 63 of the main show should be out, later this week, maybe early next week. And, we look at 2 Japanese, just, very obscure Japanese films. The titles are 964 Pinocchio and Marabito. 964 Pinocchio's from 1991. Marabito's from 2006, I think. 2004 or 2004. 4, thank you. I knew it was an even number. So yeah, check out that episode when it drops. It was a very, very interesting episode. It also turns into one of our longest episodes in a couple of years because Our Burning Questions segment actually came back after a little bit of a hiatus. And on this particular Burning Question, we take a look at IGN.com's list of their top 25 horror films of all time. Now, for those who don't know, IGN is not a horror content creator. They're just kind of they do video games, magazines, books. They're kind of an all media. They started out as just video games, but now they kind of review all media. And just like a lot of non-horror entities, every October they might release, top horror movies or top horror villains or something like that. And we basically broke down their top 25 best horror movies of all time, talked about what we agreed with, what we didn't agree with, what shouldn't have been on the list, what should have been on the list, things like that. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the type of listener you are, that turned into the longest segment of the episode. But it was still a really fun conversation because Mike made a great point on the episode that we tend to review more obscure movies on No More Room in Hell. Like you're not likely gonna see a review of Nightmare on Elm Street on No More Room in Hell. But if you're looking for a review of Executive Koala or 964 Pinocchio, then we're the show for you. But to actually be able to talk about these horror classics that we would never get a chance to talk about on the main show, it was pretty interesting. It was fun. Even though it was, probably like an hour and a half to an hour, 45-minute long segment, but I still had a good time doing it. Hopefully the listeners like it too. Hopefully it wasn't monotonous for the listeners, but that should be out, like I said, sooner than later. I think my guest spots on Cut to the Chase and the podcast Under the Stairs are still up in the air. I have no idea when they're going to happen, if they're even going to happen. I have more faith that the podcast Under the Stairs will actually happen. Cut to the Chase, those guys, they got Dan and Lacey have a lot going on, and sometimes they kind of overbook themselves with the amount of shows that they do. So, we'll see how things go. But overall, I think that's everything I have, right? I don't have any guest spots. No, that's everything I got.
All right. How about you, Dawn?
Yeah, not much. As mentioned, we have latest episode of Creature Comforts available. Definitely a fun time just getting the band back together, going through one of the best movies of all time, if not the best movie of all time. So yeah, definitely give that one a listen. Not much else. In fact, I actually don't even think there is anything else. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. I got nothing for myself. We're pretty barren on theatrical releases for the rest of the year, I'd say, right? Except for Nosferatu.
Yeah, I think we have 2 at the most. Nosferatu obviously being the bigger of the 2, but that's not till Christmas. So yeah, it's looking like VOD again next week.
Yeah, that's cool. There's plenty of stuff. So, okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Fresh Cuts. We'll be back in a week with another one. Let's say bye to our listeners.
Later.
If an elderly man who lives by himself in a gothic house asks you what your favorite fast food is, run. Just fucking run.
Peace.